"Your Majesty, your hand is bleeding." The words left Clara Bennett before she remembered that waitresses were not supposed to notice kings. Alpha King Mason Blackwood stopped beside the long oak table. 24 nobles fell silent with him. The Winter Oak Tavern had been warmed for hours, yet cold seemed to enter with the king. He stood taller than every guard behind him, broad shoulders hidden beneath a black wolf fur mantle, dark hair touched by melted snow. His face was hard, masculine, and controlled, the face of a man who had learned never to reveal pain before enemies. Mason looked down at his left hand. There was no blood. Clara knew that. She had only needed him to look. His fingers remained curled around a silver goblet, but they were not holding it correctly. The cup leaned slightly toward the table. Any other guest would have straightened his wrist before the wine reached the rim. Mason did not. He could not. Clara lowered her eyes and tightened both hands around her serving tray. "I was mistaken, Your Majesty." Across the room, Chief Healer Gideon Price watched her. His expression did not change, but one finger stopped tapping against the leather case beside him. Mason continued toward his chair. The chair stood nearest the stone fireplace, beneath the carved antlers of an ancient white stag. Heat rolled across the room in slow waves, carrying the scent of pine smoke, roasted venison, and bitter winter herbs. Clara moved to set down his meal. The moment the fire warmed the silver wolf clasp at Mason's throat, his body went rigid. Not visibly, not enough for the nobles to understand. But Clara saw the tendons tighten along his jaw. His right hand closed around the edge of the table. The silver goblet cracked beneath his left palm. A thin line of wine ran across the wood. No one moved. Mason's guards reached for their swords, believing the sound had been a threat. Gideon stepped forward. "The old injury," he said calmly. Everyone remained seated. Clara looked at Mason's face. Not anger. Pain. It moved through him in a wave, beginning below the scar near his collar and traveling down his left arm. His fingers opened at last, but only because they had lost the strength to remain closed. Gideon placed himself between Mason and the room. "Bring hot water," he ordered Clara. "Then wait behind the curtain." She obeyed. Waitresses survived by obeying quickly. She crossed the tavern, filled a copper bowl, and returned with a folded linen cloth. As she placed it beside the healer's case, a sharp smell reached her through the pine smoke. Heated silver, and something bitter beneath it. Wolfsbane. Clara's grandmother had taught her that smell years ago, when injured miners came to their cottage with blackened tools and trembling hands. Poison did not always enter through food. Sometimes it entered slowly, through metal warmed against old wounds. Clara looked at Mason's clasp. A dark bead had appeared along the seam of the silver wolf's jaw. Gideon opened a glass bottle. The liquid inside carried the same bitter scent. "Drink this," he told Mason. Mason reached for it with his right hand. Clara should have stepped behind the curtain. She should have remembered her place. Instead, she heard herself say, "Don't drink it." Every sword in the room left its sheath. Mason turned his gray eyes toward her. Gideon's voice became dangerously soft. "Servants do not advise kings." Clara stared at the black bead forming on the heated clasp. "No," she whispered. "But someone should." The first sword stopped less than an inch from Clara's throat. She did not move. Steel reflected the firelight beneath her chin while the glass bottle remained in Mason's hand. Around the table, 24 nobles watched the waitress who had interrupted an alpha king as though they had already chosen where her body would be buried. Captain Daniel Reed stepped between Clara and the nearest guard. "Lower it," he said. The guard hesitated. Mason spoke without raising his voice. All of them. Every blade returned to its sheath. Clara released the breath trapped in her chest. Gideon Price did not. The chief royal healer stood beside Mason's chair in dark green robes embroidered with silver thread. His leather case lay open across the table, filled with polished instruments, labeled bottles, and the authority of 24 healers who had examined the same pain for 6 years. He held out one hand. "Give me the tray, girl." Clara tightened her fingers around it. Mason's gray eyes remained on her. "What did you smell?" Gideon answered before she could. "Fear often invents knowledge, Your Majesty." Clara looked at the bottle in Mason's hand. The bitter scent was weaker now, buried beneath cloves and winter mint. It had been disguised carefully, not hidden from a healer, hidden from anyone who handled food every day. "Wolfsbane," she said. A murmur moved through the nobles. Gideon gave a restrained laugh. There is wolfsbane in the tonic. A measured amount. It suppresses the damaged wolf nerves surrounding the old wound. Then why does the same smell come from his clasp? Silence struck the room again. Gideon's gaze shifted toward the silver wolf beneath Mason's throat. Only for a moment. But Clara saw it. So did Mason. The Alpha King placed the unopened bottle on the table. Examined the clasp. Gideon's expression hardened. That would be unnecessary. Mason leaned back slowly, hiding the weakness in his left arm beneath the mantle. I did not ask whether it was necessary. The fire cracked behind him. Gideon reached for the clasp, but stopped before touching it. The metal may be reacting to the heat. Nothing more. Clara watched the dark bead along the wolf's jaw grow heavier. It slid beneath the silver muzzle and disappeared into the black fur. Mason's right hand crushed the arm of his chair. The pain was worsening. Gideon turned sharply toward the room. No servant touches the king. Clear the table. Close every door. The royal guards obeyed at once. Heavy locks fell into place. Tavern guests were pushed toward the walls. The musicians lowered their instruments. Even the kitchen door was barred. Clara stood beside the copper bowl, suddenly trapped inside a room full of people powerful enough to erase her name. Gideon pointed toward a curtain near the fireplace. Take the water behind there and remain silent. Clara lifted the bowl. As she passed Mason's chair, she saw his left hand resting against his thigh. The fingers were no longer trembling. They had gone completely still. Not calm. Numb. She also noticed something else. A faint black stain marked the inside edge of Gideon's right glove, the exact shape of the seam beneath Mason's silver clasp. Clara stepped behind the curtain, but she did not move far. Through the thin fabric, she heard bottles opening and instruments touching wood. 24 healers entered through the northern door, summoned from the royal keep. One by one, they surrounded Mason. They checked his pulse, his scar, his eyes, his breathing. Not one of them examined the clasp, because Gideon removed the mantle before they came close. Clara watched its shadow pass across the curtain. The silver wolf disappeared into his hands. Then Gideon spoke the rule again, louder this time. No servant comes near the king. Clara finally understood. It was not meant to protect Mason from servants. It was meant to protect the clasp from anyone who might notice what the healers had been forbidden to see. The 24th healer arrived carrying a silver basin. By then, Mason's breathing had become shallow. Clara remained behind the curtain with the copper bowl cooling between her hands. Through a narrow gap in the fabric, she watched the royal healers work in disciplined silence. One examined the scar beneath Mason's collar. Another pressed 2 fingers to his throat. A third held a polished crystal above his chest and studied the pale light moving through it. They touched his skin, counted his pulse, asked where the pain began and where it ended. No one asked what he had been wearing when it started. Gideon stood near the fireplace with Mason's mantle folded across his arms. The silver wolf clasp rested against the black fur, hidden beneath one gloved hand. Clara looked away from the healers. She looked at the table, the cracked goblet, the untouched wine, the steam rising from the venison, the chair placed nearest the fire. Mason had visited Winter Oak 3 times during the past year. Clara remembered every visit because kings altered the rhythm of a room. The first time, he had stood beside the kitchen hearth while speaking to Captain Daniel. His left hand had begun trembling before the soup arrived. The second time, he had sat beneath the iron chandelier with a cup of mulled cider. Pain had tightened his face before he took the first drink. Tonight, the same thing had happened. Warmth first, pain second. Not the food, not the wine. Heat. His pulse is weakening, one healer said. We should increase the tonic, another replied. Gideon opened a second bottle. Clara smelled Winterman again. Beneath it, the same bitterness. She stared at the mantle in Gideon's arms. A tiny black drop gathered beneath the clasp and fell onto the fur. It did not soak into the hairs. It sat on the surface like oil. Clara had seen that before. Years ago, her grandmother had repaired an old miner's lamp. The brass reservoir had looked solid until heat softened the wax hidden inside its seam. Poisoned oil had leaked through a hole too small to see. Clara shifted the bowl to one arm. The movement disturbed the curtain. Gideon looked toward her. Remained still. She lowered her eyes. But not before she noticed his thumb press against the back of the silver wolf. The dark liquid stopped. A valve. The clasp was not merely decorative. It was a container. One of the younger healers approached Mason with a heated cloth. Gideon moved quickly, not near the scar. The healer paused. You instructed us to warm the damaged nerves. The skin is too sensitive tonight. Mason's eyes opened. Even through the curtain, Clara felt the weight of his attention settle on Gideon. Why, he asked. Gideon offered the practiced patience of a man accustomed to answering kings. Because excessive heat may spread the curse. Clara nearly spoke. The pain had already spread whenever the clasp became warm. The healer placed the cloth against Mason's shoulder instead. His left arm jerked. The silver basin struck the floor. The sound rang through the tavern. Mason's wolf aura surged outward. Candles bent beneath the force. Several nobles staggered back. One healer dropped to his knees. Clara held the curtain frame until the pressure passed. Gideon uncorked the tonic. We cannot delay. Mason reached for it. His numb fingers failed to close around the glass. The bottle slipped. Gideon caught it before it struck the table. Too quickly, as though protecting the medicine mattered more than protecting the king. Clara stepped out from behind the curtain. Captain Daniel moved to block her. She pointed past him, not at the tonic, at the folded mantle. The pain always begins near heat, she said. And every time the healers examine him, that clasp is removed first. Gideon's face became still. Clara met Mason's gray eyes. The thing hurting you is not inside your wound. She looked at the silver wolf hidden beneath Gideon's hand. It is touching it. Take it off. Clara's voice was not loud. It still reached every corner of the tavern. Gideon Price turned toward her with the silver wolf clasp hidden beneath his gloved hand. Behind him, 24 healers stood around Alpha King Mason Blackwood, each carrying instruments, bottles, or polished stones that had failed to stop the pain tightening through his body. Captain Daniel stepped between Clara and the royal table. You have spoken enough. No, Mason said. The single word stopped him. Mason sat rigid in the carved chair, his broad frame held unnaturally still. Sweat darkened the hair near his temple. His left hand rested open against his thigh, useless now, while his right hand gripped the table hard enough to split the wood. His gray eyes remained on Clara. What do you want removed? She pointed toward the mantle. The clasp. Gideon gave a cold laugh. A servant smells one familiar herb and believes herself wiser than the Royal Healing Council. Clara's knees wanted to bend. She kept them straight. I never said I was wiser. Then returned behind the curtain. She looked at the dark stain on his glove. You stopped the liquid with your thumb. Gideon's smile disappeared. The room became very quiet. Clara continued before fear could close her throat. The wolf's jaw has a seam. Heat softens something inside it. When the clasp warms, the black liquid leaks. When you press the back, it stops. One of the younger healers looked toward the mantle. Gideon folded the fur over the silver wolf. There is no liquid. A drop fell onto the fur. Oil from the metal. It did not soak in. Mason's attention shifted to Gideon. Show me. The chief healer did not move. Mason's voice lowered. Show me the clasp. Gideon approached the table slowly, but instead of placing the mantle before the king, he reached for the tonic. The pain is clouding your judgment. You must drink before. Clara smelled the bitterness as the bottle opened. Don't. Daniel caught her arm as she stepped forward. Gideon raised the glass toward Mason's mouth. The Alpha King struck it from his hand. The bottle shattered against the stone floor. A sharp medicinal scent spread beneath the winter mint. Wolfsbane, stronger than before. Several healers recoiled. Mason rose. The movement cost him. His shoulder dropped, and pain passed across his face before he buried it beneath anger. He towered over Gideon. Give her the mantle. Your Majesty, now. Gideon held the fur tighter. That was the moment Clara knew. An innocent healer would have surrendered the clasp to prove her wrong. Gideon was protecting it. Daniel released Clara and drew his sword. Place it on the table. For the first time, uncertainty entered Gideon's eyes. He obeyed. The black mantle landed beside the cracked goblet. The silver wolf rested on top, its polished face harmless in the firelight. Clara approached carefully. The heat near the table warmed her cheeks. She could smell pine smoke, spilled tonic, and the faint metallic bitterness rising from the clasp. She did not touch it. Instead, she picked up the wooden tongs used to turn roasting meat. Gideon scoffed. You intend to heal a king with kitchen tools? No, Clara slid the tongs beneath the wolf's jaw. I intend to keep the poison off my hands. Mason watched her clamp the metal and turn it sideways. A thin black line appeared along the seam. One healer stepped closer. There is something inside. Gideon backed away from the table. Daniel's sword followed him. Clara pressed gently against the rear plate. A hollow click answered. The silver wolf's jaw opened. Inside waited a narrow channel filled with softened black wax. And beneath it, almost too small to see, lay the point of a hollow moon-silver needle. Its angle matched the scar below Mason's collar exactly. Clara looked at the Alpha King. It was never only a clasp. Mason's eyes hardened. How long? She glanced at the fire, the melting wax, and the dark bead gathering at the needle's tip. 1 minute, she said. Give me 1 minute, and I can prove what it has been doing to you. Start counting. Mason's command cut through the tavern. Clara placed the wooden tongs beside the opened clasp and reached for the copper bowl. The water had cooled while the healers argued. That was better. Heat had fed the mechanism. Cold might slow whatever remained beneath Mason's skin. Gideon stood between two guards, Daniel's sword at his throat. This is madness, he said. She has no training. Clara dipped a clean linen cloth into the salt water. My grandmother treated miners no royal healer would touch. Gideon's mouth tightened. Mason noticed. 30 seconds, Daniel said. Clara moved behind the Alpha King. Up close, he seemed even larger. His shoulders filled the carved chair, but pain had drawn one side lower than the other. Beneath the collar of his black shirt, an old scar crossed the base of his neck. At its center waited a small black puncture, exactly where the hollow needle rested. Clara used the tongs to lift the silver clasp away from the mantle. A thread of softened wax stretched between the metal and fur. The bitter smell deepened. Several healers stepped back. Clara did not. She lowered the clasp into the copper bowl. The water hissed. Black clouds spread around the silver wolf. 40 seconds, Daniel said. Mason's right hand tightened against the table. His left remained still. Clara pressed the cold linen over the puncture. Beneath her fingers, the skin felt unnaturally hot. Does it burn? She asked. Yes. Different from before? Mason closed his eyes. The pain is moving. Gideon seized upon the words. She is spreading it. Stop her now. Clara looked at Mason's arm. The muscles near his shoulder trembled once. Then again, not weakening, waking. She replaced the cloth with a fresh fold and pressed harder. Open your hand. I cannot. Try. His jaw flexed. Nothing happened. 50 seconds, Daniel said. Whispers moved through the nobles. 24 healers watched the waitress kneeling beside their king with nothing but kitchen tongs, salt water, and linen. Clara remembered miners sitting beside her grandmother's stove, ashamed because their fingers would not obey them. Pain teaches the body to expect pain. Do not fight the whole hand, she said. Move one finger. Mason opened his eyes. His smallest finger shifted. Barely, but it moved. The room went silent. Again, Clara whispered. The finger lifted. Then the next. Mason inhaled sharply as sensation returned through his palm. Gideon's face lost its color. 58, Daniel said. Clara removed the cloth. The black puncture had stopped leaking. The angry red line around the scar was already fading. 59. Mason looked at his left hand. For 6 years, it had betrayed him whenever the pain came. Before councils, before battles, before men waiting to call weakness instability. He spread all 5 fingers. 60. The Alpha King closed his hand into a fist. No tremor, no collapse, no pain crossing his face. Clara sat back on her heels. Around them, the 24 healers stared at Mason's restored hand as though they had witnessed a dead limb return to life. Gideon found his voice first. She placed the needle there. Daniel turned his sword toward him. Clara looked at the clasp submerged in blackened water. No, she said. I only removed what someone else needed him to keep wearing. Mason rose without using the table. For the first time that night, both shoulders stood level. He opened and closed his left hand once more, testing the absence of pain. Then he looked at Clara, not with gratitude. Not yet. With the attention of a king who had just discovered that a waitress had seen the truth hidden beneath 6 years of medicine. What is your name? He asked. Clara Bennett. Mason repeated it slowly. The entire tavern heard him. Then he turned toward Gideon. Seal every door. His restored hand closed around the chief healer's wrist. No one leaves until I learn who taught my healer to poison me. The pain was never an illness. Mason said it quietly. That made the words more dangerous. Gideon stood between two royal guards while the blackened clasp remained submerged in the copper bowl. The water around it had turned gray, and a thin, oily film clung to the surface. 24 healers stared at it. None stepped forward. Clara remained beside Mason's chair, one hand still holding the damp linen. Her knees trembled now that the danger had passed. Not from weakness, from understanding. Someone had not failed to cure the Alpha King. Someone had made certain he remained sick. Lady Vanessa Crowe rose from the northern table. Her silver gown caught the firelight as she crossed the room with controlled anger. This girl touched the king's wound, opened his royal clasp, and handled the poison herself, she said. For all we know, she placed the needle there. Gideon seized the accusation. Exactly. She knew where to look because she built the device. Several nobles murmured agreement. Clara looked toward Mason. His face revealed nothing. The pain was gone, but the room had become more dangerous than before. Vanessa pointed at Clara. She should be executed before panic spreads through the pack. Mason flexed his restored left hand. Once. Slowly. Then he turned to Captain Daniel. Seal the healers' cases. Gideon stiffened. Your Majesty? Collect every bottle, every cloth, every instrument. Daniel motioned to the guards. The healers protested as their cases were taken from the table. Glass clicked against glass. Silver tools disappeared into evidence chests. Vanessa's expression tightened. Mason looked at Clara. Did you see anyone place the needle? No. Did you touch the clasp before tonight? No. Then I will not replace one assumption with another. Clara lowered her head. He was not defending her. Not yet. He was doing something more useful. He was protecting the truth from everyone in the room. Mason turned toward the healers. When did each of you examine me? The oldest healer swallowed. After Chief Healer Price prepared you. What did preparation include? Silence. Mason waited. A young healer finally answered. The ceremonial mantle was removed. By whom? Chief Healer Price. Another healer spoke. We were told the silver interfered with diagnostic crystals. And the scar? Mason asked. We examined it after the mantle had been taken away. Clara felt the pattern closing around Gideon. 24 healers. 6 years. Not one had seen the object touching the wound before the examination began. Mason looked at Gideon. You controlled what they were allowed to observe. Gideon's face hardened. I protected your dignity. You protected the mechanism. Vanessa stepped closer. This proves nothing. The waitress could have altered the clasp before the king arrived. Clara looked at the mantle. A line of fresh stitching ran along the inner collar. The thread was dark green, the same shade embroidered through Gideon's robes. She pointed. That seam was opened recently. Daniel lifted the fur with a gloved hand. Beneath the collar, tiny punctures marked the leather where the hollow needle had been repositioned again and again. Not once. Many times. Each repair had shifted the angle slightly as Mason's scar changed. The device had been maintained. Gideon moved suddenly. His shoulder struck the nearest guard. One hand reached for the open healer's case on the table. Mason caught his wrist before his fingers touched the hidden blade inside. The room froze. Mason's restored hand tightened. Gideon dropped to one knee. Vanessa stepped backward. Too quickly. Clara saw Daniel notice. Mason looked from Gideon to Vanessa, then toward every locked door. No one leaves, he said. No one speaks beyond this room. His gaze settled on Clara. You found the weapon. She held the linen tighter. Yes. Now we find the hand that ordered it placed there. For the first time, Vanessa looked afraid. Arrest Clara Bennett. For one heartbeat, no one understood the order. Clara did. The damp linen slipped from her fingers and landed beside the copper bowl. Captain Daniel looked at Mason as though he had misheard. Your Majesty? You heard me. Mason released Gideon's wrist and stepped away from the kneeling healer. His face had returned to the cold stillness every noble recognized. No pain, no weakness, no sign that Clara had restored movement to the hand now resting against the hilt of his sword. Vanessa's fear disappeared. A slow satisfaction replaced it. 2 guards approached Clara. She did not resist when they took her arms. 24 healers watched in silence. Some looked relieved. Others refused to meet her eyes. Gideon rose carefully. The king has chosen reason, he said. Mason turned toward him. I have chosen evidence. Clara searched his face for the attention he had given her only moments earlier. There was nothing. The man she had saved stood before the entire room, and allowed them to believe she had poisoned him. Vanessa moved closer to the royal table. The waitress should be questioned before the elders leave. If she has accomplices, no one leaves, Mason said. His voice struck harder than a shout. Vanessa stopped. Daniel placed himself beside Clara, but his hand remained near his sword rather than on her shoulder. On what charge? He asked. Attempted poisoning of the Alpha King. The words moved through the tavern like winter air. Clara felt every gaze change. She was no longer the waitress who had solved 6 years of pain. She was the servant who had stood close enough to create it. Gideon smiled. Only slightly. Mason noticed. Take her below, he ordered. The guards turned Clara toward the cellar passage. She took 3 steps before Mason spoke again. Wait. He approached her slowly. The room watched him close the distance between king and prisoner. His restored left hand reached for the edge of her apron. Clara forced herself not to flinch. He removed a strand of black wax caught in the linen fold. To everyone else, it looked like evidence. Then he leaned close enough that only she could hear him. How long did the wax take to melt? Clara's breath stopped. Not betrayal. A test. She kept her expression empty. 1 minute. His thumb closed around the wax. Then give me one more. He stepped away. Take her. Daniel's eyes shifted toward Clara. He had heard nothing, but he saw something in Mason's face that made him lower his hand from his sword. The guards led Clara through the kitchen and down the stone steps beneath Winter Oak Tavern. The sounds of the sealed hall faded above her. At the bottom waited a narrow cell with iron bars and a single torch. Daniel dismissed the guards. When they were alone, he unlocked one cuff but left the other closed. What did he say? Clara looked toward the ceiling. Heavy footsteps crossed the tavern above. Furniture moved. A council table being prepared. He asked about the wax. Daniel frowned. Clara remembered the heat, the hidden valve, and the way Gideon's thumb had stopped the poison. Mason wants them to believe the device still works. Above them, a door opened. Vanessa's voice drifted faintly through the floor. You should wear the ceremonial clasp before the elders return. Clara gripped the iron bar. A second voice answered. Gideon, I have another. Daniel's expression changed. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the ceiling. 1 minute. That was how long the wax required to soften. 1 minute for Gideon to reveal the replacement clasp. 1 minute for Vanessa to expose why Mason's pain had been necessary. And 1 minute for Clara to decide whether the Alpha King truly trusted the waitress he had just condemned. My grandmother was never allowed to call herself a healer. Clara spoke through the iron bars while footsteps moved across the tavern ceiling. Captain Daniel stood outside the cell, listening. She treated minors, Clara continued. Men who came home with silver dust beneath their nails and poison burned into their skin. Royal healers would not enter their quarters. Why? They could not pay. Daniel's jaw tightened. Clara looked at the torchlight trembling against the stone wall. My grandmother learned that moon silver poisoning begins with pain, then numbness, then rage. The body feels trapped inside itself. The wolf becomes desperate to escape. Above them, chairs scraped across the council floor. Gideon was preparing the replacement clasp. Daniel understood. They do not only want Mason weak. They want him violent. If Mason lost control before the pack elders, the council could declare him unstable. Vanessa would demand a regent. Gideon would certify the illness. 6 years of pain had not been treatment. It had been preparation. Daniel unlocked Clara's second cuff. Stay here. No, that was not a request. Then it was a poor order. He stared at her. Clara moved closer to the bars. Gideon knows how long the wax takes to melt. Mason knows too. But neither of them knows whether the replacement clasp releases poison faster. Daniel looked toward the stairs. 1 minute. Perhaps less. He opened the cell. They reached the records room beneath the kitchen while the council gathered above. Daniel forced the lock on a cedar chest marked with the seal of the Royal Healing Council. Inside were treatment ledgers. Clara searched the oldest pages. Her grandmother's name appeared near the bottom of one report. Eleanor Bennett. License revoked. Reason: unauthorized claims regarding wolfsbane exposure among wounded soldiers. The signature beneath the order belonged to Gideon Price. Daniel found another page. Transfers of moon silver clasps. Payments from Lady Vanessa Crowe. Clara touched the ink. They silenced her because she recognized the symptoms. A bell rang upstairs. The council had begun. Daniel gathered the ledgers and drew his sword. They entered through the servants' passage behind the northern wall. Mason stood at the center of the council chamber, wearing a black ceremonial mantle. A silver wolf clasp rested against his scar. Gideon watched the fireplace. Vanessa stood beside the locked doors. The first bead of black liquid appeared beneath the wolf's jaw. Clara's pulse quickened. Mason's left hand began to curl. One elder noticed. "Your Majesty?" Vanessa stepped forward. "The king is unwell." "For the safety of the council, not yet," Gideon whispered. He was waiting for the poison to spread. Clara emerged from the passage. "Take it off." Every head turned. Vanessa's face twisted. "She is supposed to be imprisoned." Daniel entered behind Clara and raised the ledgers. "So is the man who falsified 6 years of royal treatments." Gideon reached beneath his robe. Mason moved first. His restored hand closed around Gideon's wrist before the hidden trigger could be pressed. But the clasp had already warmed. Pain struck Mason hard enough to bend one knee. The elders recoiled. Vanessa seized the moment. "You see? He cannot control himself." Clara crossed the room. She used the wooden handle of a council stamp to pry the clasp from Mason's throat. Black wax spilled across the mantle. Mason's wolf aura surged. Windows shook. Guards reached for their swords. Clara knelt before him, not touching the poisoned metal. "Listen to me." His gray eyes had gone almost silver. "The pain is not your wolf," she said. "It is what they put inside you." His breathing slowed. One breath, then another. The pressure in the room weakened. Mason stood. Behind him, 24 healers watched their king regain control without Gideon's tonic. Daniel placed the ledgers on the council table. Clara looked at Gideon. "My grandmother knew what you were doing." Gideon's face turned pale. Clara rose beside the Alpha King. She simply did not have a title powerful enough to make anyone listen. 24 healers treated my pain. Mason stood before the council table with the poisoned clasp resting in a sealed iron tray. No one spoke. The black wax had hardened along the silver wolf's jaw. Beside it lay Gideon's hidden trigger, Vanessa's payment records, and 6 years of treatment ledgers bearing the same repeated lie. Old injury. Unstable wolf. Progressive curse. Mason placed his restored left hand flat against the wood. The waitress found the hand causing it. Every healer lowered their eyes. Gideon stood between 2 guards, his green robes torn where Daniel had searched him. Vanessa remained near the locked doors, stripped of her council insignia, but not yet of her pride. "This proves only that Gideon acted without my knowledge," she said. Daniel opened the final ledger. "Then explain your seal." He turned the page toward the elders. Payments to the Royal Healing Council. Orders for hollow moonsilver clasps. Instructions to increase the wolfsbane concentration before every gathering where Mason's fitness to rule would be judged. Vanessa's face remained still. Her pulse did not. Clara could see it beating beneath the pale skin of her throat. Mason saw her watching. "What was the final dose meant to do?" he asked. Vanessa looked at Gideon. He looked away. That was answer enough. Clara stepped closer to the council table. "The poison caused pain first," she said. "Then numbness. If the dose continued, his wolf would have fought the paralysis." One elder swallowed. "He would have shifted inside the council chamber and injured someone," Daniel said. Vanessa lifted her chin. "The pack requires a ruler who can control himself." Mason's expression did not change. "You created the loss of control you intended to condemn. You were becoming impossible to guide." The room seemed to contract around her words. Mason moved toward Vanessa. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You poisoned your king because he would not surrender authority to you. I protected the kingdom from your pride." "No," Clara said. Vanessa turned sharply. Clara met her gaze. "You protected the power you expected to inherit." For one breath, Vanessa looked ready to strike her. Mason stepped between them. "Touch her, and the judgment begins with treason against the crown." Vanessa's courage failed. Guards took her arms. Gideon began speaking quickly. She ordered the payments. "I only maintain the device. I can name every noble involved." Mason looked at him with quiet disgust. "You had 6 years to speak." Daniel led both conspirators away. The 24 healers remained. Mason turned toward them. "Why did none of you question the missing mantle?" The oldest healer answered. "Chief Healer Price controlled access to your treatment." "And that prevented you from thinking?" The man lowered his head. "No, Your Majesty." Mason looked toward Clara. She still wore her blue-gray apron. Wolfsbane stained one corner. Her hands smelled of salt water and iron, not royal medicine. "What did your grandmother teach you?" he asked. "That pain leaves patterns," Clara said, "but only if someone watches the person instead of the title." Mason ordered Daniel to bring forward Eleanor Bennett's revoked license. He tore Gideon's seal from the parchment. Before the assembled council, he declared every accusation against Eleanor false. Her name would be restored to the healing register, and the minors she had treated would be compensated from Gideon's estate. Clara's composure broke only once. Her eyes closed when Mason spoke her grandmother's name. When she opened them, he was still watching her. "Clara Bennett," he said, "from this day forward, no medicine, garment, weapon, or ceremonial object touches the royal family without your inspection." A murmur spread through the room. One healer protested. "She has no formal title." Mason looked at him. "She has one now." He named her Royal Examiner of Poisons and Hidden Mechanisms. Clara stared at him. "I work at the Winter Oak Tavern." "Then the Crown knows where to find you." Days later, after Gideon and Vanessa had been taken to Blackwood Keep, Mason returned to the tavern alone. No guards entered with him. No royal mantle covered his shoulders. Clara was wiping the final table after closing when he placed the broken silver clasp before her. "Does it still smell wrong?" he asked. She leaned closer. "Only cold metal. No wax. No bitterness." "No, then why are you still watching me?" Clara folded the cloth slowly. "Because pain teaches people how to hide." Mason pulled out the chair opposite him. Not a command. An invitation. Clara sat. For the first time, the Alpha King did not ask her to heal him. He simply remained where she could see him. The poison did not begin with the king. Clara spoke before anyone entered the breakfast hall. Mason stopped beside her. Morning light passed through the tall windows of Blackwood Keep, turning the stone floor pale gold. He wore no ceremonial mantle now. Only a black wool coat fastened with plain horn buttons that Clara had inspected herself. On the table between them lay 6 silver objects removed from the royal chambers. A goblet, a hunting knife, a child's bracelet, 2 cloak clasps, and a small wolf-shaped rattle. Mason looked at the rattle. "My sister's son uses that." "Not anymore." Clara lifted it with wooden tongs. A dark line marked the seam beneath the wolf's neck. It was thinner than the one hidden inside Mason's clasp, but the construction was the same. Hollow silver, heat-softened wax, a needle small enough to disappear beneath decoration. Captain Daniel entered with 2 guards. "We searched Gideon's rooms," he said. "No workshop, no tools capable of making these." "Then he did not build them," Clara replied. Mason's face hardened. "He only placed them." Daniel set a leather ledger beside the objects. Vanessa's records named payments, but not the craftsman. Clara opened the book. Most entries were written in Gideon's precise hand. Herbs, healing crystals, moon silver repairs. One phrase appeared repeatedly beside large sums. Winter maintenance. No destination. No signature. Only a stamped symbol shaped like a broken crown. Mason leaned over the page. "I have seen that mark before." "Where?" "On battlefield supplies during the Northern Rebellion." Daniel's expression changed. "Those weapons were destroyed." Someone disagreed. A soft sound came from the corridor. Not footsteps. Something small rolling across stone. Clara turned. The wolf-shaped rattle had a twin. It rolled through the open doorway and stopped against Mason's boot. A young boy stood at the far end of the hall. Prince Oliver Crowe, Vanessa's 7-year-old nephew. His face was pale. One hand pressed against his chest while the other hung useless at his side. "Uncle Mason," he whispered. Then his knees folded. Mason reached him before he struck the floor. Clara followed, already smelling the air. Heated silver. Bitter wax. The boy wore no clasp. No bracelet. Nothing touched his skin except a red wool shirt. "Find it," Mason said. Clara searched him carefully. Collar. Cuffs. Boots. No metal. Oliver's breathing shortened. Daniel called for a healer. Clara looked at the rattle beside Mason's foot. Its seam was open, but the child had not been holding it when he collapsed. She lifted the red shirt near his shoulder. A tiny black puncture marked the fabric. Not from the rattle. From something else. Something that had already been removed. Oliver's fingers curled against Mason's coat. She said it was medicine. "Who?" Mason asked. The boy tried to answer. Only air came out. Clara touched the skin near the puncture. Cold. Unlike Mason's heated wound. This poison had entered all at once. Not over years. Designed to silence him quickly. She looked toward the corridor. A maid's empty medicine tray rested beside the wall. One glass vial remained upon it. The royal healing seal had been scratched away. Daniel drew his sword. Lock the keep. Clara picked up the vial. A trace of dark green thread clung to its stopper. Gideon's color. But Gideon was imprisoned beneath 3 levels of stone. Mason lifted Oliver into his arms. The boy's breathing weakened. Clara looked at the wolf rattle, the broken crown stamped in the ledger, and the open corridor beyond the abandoned tray. Gideon had not worked alone. Someone inside Blackwood Keep had continued the treatment after his arrest. And this time, the poison was not meant to create pain. It was meant to prevent a child from naming the person who had given it to him. Do not let the healers touch him. Clara's order stopped 3 men at the breakfast hall doors. They wore gray robes now, not Gideon's green, but each carried a leather case marked with the Royal Healing Council seal. Mason stood with Oliver in his arms. The boy's breathing came in shallow pulls. His face had lost its color, and the fingers of his left hand remained locked against Mason's coat. One healer stepped forward. He needs an antidote. Clara lifted the glass vial from the abandoned tray. Then tell me what was inside this. The healer looked at it. Too briefly. I cannot know without testing. You recognize the bottle. His gaze shifted. Captain Daniel noticed. He closed the doors behind them. No one leaves. Clara knelt beside the long table and set the vial near the wolf-shaped rattle. The remaining liquid moved slowly against the glass. Not oil. Not tonic. Something thicker. She smelled winter mint, but beneath it waited a sharp, earthy scent. Ironroot. Her grandmother had used it to slow bleeding. Combined with wolfsbane, it did something else. It forced the poison inward, kept it from rising through sweat, made the victim appear calm while the lungs weakened. Oliver coughed once. No sound followed. Mason's control fractured. The windows trembled beneath the force of his wolf aura. The healer stepped back. Even Daniel braced one hand against the wall. Clara looked at Mason. Put him on the table. His gray eyes had gone silver. Save him. I need you to hear me first. The pressure in the room deepened. Clara did not look away. The poison is using his fear. If his heart runs faster, it reaches his lungs faster. Mason forced the aura down. Then he laid Oliver carefully on the table. Clara opened the boy's shirt. The black puncture near his shoulder had spread into a dark circle beneath the skin. No needle remained inside. A single injection. Fast. Deliberate. She pressed 2 fingers near the mark. Oliver flinched. Good, she whispered. He can still feel it. She turned toward the healers. Bring cold salt water, charcoal powder, and clean linen. The youngest healer moved first. The oldest remained still. Clara looked at him. You know this mixture. His face tightened. I have seen similar symptoms. Where? No answer. Daniel drew his sword halfway. Answer her. The healer swallowed. During the Northern Rebellion. Prisoners were given it before interrogation. Mason's voice became dangerously quiet. To keep them conscious? To keep them alive long enough to speak. Clara looked at Oliver. The poison had not been meant to kill immediately. It had been meant to frighten him into silence. Someone expected him to survive. Barely. She pressed the cold linen over the puncture while the younger healer mixed charcoal into water. Oliver, she said softly, listen to my voice. His eyelids moved. You do not have to tell us who hurt you. Not yet. His fingers loosened slightly. Clara lifted his head and gave him a small amount of the charcoal mixture. He coughed. This time, sound returned. Mason closed his eyes for one breath. Daniel searched the medicine tray and found a narrow, hidden compartment beneath the wood. Inside lay a folded strip of parchment. One sentence had been written across it. The child saw the workshop. Mason read it twice. Clara continued cooling the puncture until the dark circle stopped spreading. Oliver's breathing deepened. Not safe, but improving. His hand moved from Mason's coat and found Clara's wrist instead. She makes the wolves, he whispered. Clara leaned closer. Who? The boy's eyes opened. Fear entered them before recognition. He looked past Clara toward the gray-robed healers. Not at all 3. At the oldest one. The man stepped backward. Daniel blocked the door. Oliver's voice broke. The lady with the broken crown. The healer reached inside his robe. Mason crossed the distance before the hidden blade cleared the fabric. His restored left hand closed around the man's throat. Clara looked at the broken crown symbol in Vanessa's ledger. It had never been the mark of a craftsman. It belonged to a woman. And somewhere inside Blackwood Keep, she still had a workshop full of silver wolves. The workshop is beneath the chapel. The oldest healer said it with Mason's hand still around his throat. No one moved. Oliver lay on the breakfast table beneath folded blankets, his breathing stronger but uneven. Clara kept one hand against the cold linen covering the puncture in his shoulder. Captain Daniel searched the healer's robes and removed a narrow knife, 2 sealed vials, and a bronze key stamped with the broken crown. Mason released him. The man fell to his knees. "Who is she?" Mason asked. The healer rubbed his throat. "Margaret Vale." Daniel's expression changed. "The royal silversmith died 12 years ago." She wanted the court to believe that. Clara looked at the wolf-shaped rattle. Its polished face had been shaped by an expert hand. The hollow seam was almost invisible. Gideon could maintain such devices, but he could not have forged them. Margaret had made the wolves. Why would a royal silversmith poison the king? Clara asked. The healer gave a bitter smile. Because the king destroyed her family. Mason's face remained still. "I executed her husband for selling weapons to rebel packs. You executed him after Gideon gave you false evidence." The accusation entered the room like cold air. Daniel tightened his grip on the man's shoulder. "Careful." He told her the truth years later. The healer continued. By then, she no longer wanted justice. She wanted the crown to suffer slowly. Clara looked at Mason. The answer hurt him, but not because he believed himself innocent. Because a king could be deceived and still carry the weight of the sentence. Oliver's fingers tightened around Clara's wrist. "The lady said Uncle Mason would become a monster," he whispered. Mason approached the table. "She lied." Oliver's eyes filled with tears. "She showed me the silver wolves. She said they were all waiting." Clara bent closer. Waiting for what? For the bells. A chapel bell rang somewhere deep inside Blackwood Keep. Once, every silver object on the breakfast table clicked. The goblet, the knife, the bracelet, both clasps, the wolf rattle. Small hidden springs shifted inside them. Clara pulled Oliver away from the table. "Get down." Mason overturned the heavy oak bench between them and the objects as 6 silver needles snapped outward. One struck the wall. Another buried itself in the bench. The child's bracelet released a black mist into the air. Daniel dragged the captured healer toward the doors. Clara covered Oliver's mouth with clean linen. "Do not breathe deeply." Mason seized the burning objects with the thick breakfast cloth and swept them into the fireplace. Black wax hissed against the flames. The healer laughed. That was only the first bell. Daniel struck him silent. Clara looked toward the corridor. Chapel bells connected every wing of the keep. Servants used them to mark prayers, meals, funerals, and attacks. If Margaret had placed similar mechanisms throughout the castle, one signal could activate dozens at once. "Where are the other wolves?" Mason demanded. The healer spat blood onto the floor. "In every room your family believes is safe." A second bell rang. Farther away. Higher. From the royal nursery. Mason turned toward the door. "Daniel, secure Oliver." "I am coming with you," Clara said. "No." She built the poison to resemble ordinary royal objects. "Your guards will search for weapons. I know what does not belong." Mason looked at Oliver, then at the silver needle embedded in the bench. "Stay behind me." They moved through the northern corridor. Servants crowded the walls as Daniel's guards ordered everyone away from silver decorations, ceremonial blades, and children's toys. Somewhere above, a woman screamed. The second bell continued ringing. Not a prayer. A countdown. Clara heard 4 measured strikes. Then silence. They reached the chapel doors. The bronze key opened a narrow panel hidden behind the statue of the moon goddess. Stone steps descended beneath the altar. Warm metallic air rose from below. Silver, wax, wolfsbane, and something burning. Mason entered first. Clara followed him into a workshop larger than the chapel above. Hundreds of silver wolves covered the tables. Clasp wolves, cup wolves, toy wolves, small ceremonial wolves designed for doors, weapons, clothing, and cradles. At the center stood a white-haired woman in a leather apron. Margaret Vale held a hammer in one hand and a bell cord in the other. Her eyes settled on Mason. "You finally came without your healers." Then she looked at Clara. "And you brought the waitress who ruined 6 years of work." Clara studied the room. Every silver wolf faced inward, not toward Mason, toward Margaret. Thin wires connected them to the bell cord in her hand. She was standing inside her own killing circle. Clara saw the black wax dripping near Margaret's boots. One spark from the forge would ignite it. Margaret did not intend to escape. She intended to take the Alpha King, the workshop, and every piece of evidence with her. Clara touched Mason's arm. Do not threaten her. His eyes remained on the bell cord. Why? Because she wants you angry enough to step closer. Margaret smiled. At least one person in this kingdom still knows how to observe. Clara looked at the forge, the wires, and the molten wax running toward the central drain. Then she heard a faint scraping sound beneath the nearest workbench. A child trying not to cry. Oliver had not been the only witness. Someone else was trapped inside the workshop, and Margaret's hand had already begun to pull the final bell. The bell will kill the child before it kills us. Clara said it as Margaret's hand tightened around the cord. The white-haired silversmith paused. Only slightly. But Mason saw it. So did Clara. The scraping beneath the workbench stopped. A small hand appeared between two wooden crates. Margaret's eyes flicked toward it. That was enough. Mason moved. Not toward Margaret. Toward the child. He crossed the workshop in 3 strides and overturned the nearest table, placing its thick oak surface between the hidden boy and the silver wolves. Margaret pulled the bell cord. Clara seized the iron ladle beside the forge and struck the main wire where it passed through a brass guide. The wire snapped. The bell above them rang once. Half the silver wolves opened. Needles shot inward across the room. They struck workbenches, stone pillars, and the overturned table. One passed through Mason's sleeve without touching skin. The remaining mechanisms stayed closed. Margaret stared at the broken wire. No, Clara dropped the ladle and ran toward the forge. Black wax flowed through carved channels in the floor, carrying flame toward the central tables. The workshop had been designed to burn after the attack. Mason dragged the trapped child from beneath the bench. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old, clung to his coat with both hands. Take her, he told Clara. Clara lifted the girl and turned toward the stairs. Margaret stepped into their path with a silver hammer raised. You do not get to carry children out of the ruins you created. Mason placed himself between them. I sentenced a traitor. You sentenced an innocent man using Gideon's lies. And I will answer for failing to see them. Margaret's expression broke. Not with forgiveness. With surprise. Kings were supposed to defend their judgment. Mason did not. He looked at the burning channels spreading beneath the tables. But these children did not condemn your husband. Margaret's grip weakened. Clara saw the second bell cord hanging behind her. Shorter. Connected to the unopened wolves. Margaret, Clara said softly. Your husband died because powerful people used false evidence. Do not make these children die for the same reason. The silversmith looked toward the girl in Clara's arms. The child hid her face against Clara's shoulder. Flames reached the first table. Silver mechanisms began to hiss. Margaret released the hammer. Then her hand moved toward the second cord. Mason lunged. Margaret pulled. Clara kicked the bronze counterweight beneath the forge. The bell cord jerked sideways instead of downward. Its hook tore free from the ceiling. The final bell did not ring. Mason caught Margaret before she fell into the burning wax. For one moment, she struggled against him. Then the strength left her body. Captain Daniel and the guards rushed down the stairs carrying wet blankets. They smothered the wax channels, broke open the drainage gates, and carried every unopened silver wolf into iron chests. Margaret was taken alive. Her ledgers named Gideon's remaining allies, the nobles who financed the poison, and every royal object altered during the past 6 years. By sunset, the Broken Crown network had been dismantled. Oliver survived. So did the girl from the workshop. Days later, Mason stood before the Royal Healing Council without a mantle, clasp, or ceremonial silver. Clara stood beside him, not behind a curtain. Mason restored Eleanor Bennett's name publicly and ordered a healing house built for miners, servants, and soldiers who could not afford royal care. Then he turned toward Clara. You were right. About the poison? About pain. His restored left hand opened between them. It teaches people how to hide. Clara placed her hand in his. And listening teaches them they no longer have to. This time, the Alpha King did not ask her to stand close because he needed protection. He asked because the kingdom had learned what happened when no one listened to the Waitress.